So for step 23, checking the RC equipment, well, this is a very important step because the whole point of it is to make sure that your steering servo is set to neutral. So what you're going to want to do is make sure with the remote all of the settings, trim settings are set to neutral. And then once we've plugged everything in, this servo should go to neutral, allowing us to put on all the servo saver stuff. Because if you don't do this step and the servo's not in neutral, all of this is going to be set up wrong and you're going to have to start again. So there's the servo that we're going to be putting in, an SU300 Futaba digital servo. This kit didn't actually come with a speed controller, so I have a Hobbywing 1060 speed controller right here that we're going to use. And then, of course, we have the screws, which I'll show you why I've picked that one once we get into this. So I'll set this up and we'll check to see if the servo's in neutral. So first off, if you look at this, I have everything set to neutral. This is also in the normal setting. So those are where they should be, and so are those. Because if you look at the picture, they're showing the trims need to be set, but the picture diagram underneath is showing that both the throttle and steering should be in the normal position, not servo reversed position. So there we have our transmitter. It's ready. I've got it all plugged into the receiver. The steering servo is plugged into channel 1. Channel 1 is always your steering. And the Hobbywing, there isn't the notch that the Futaba ones have. So if you get confused, what I always do is I plug in the steering servo, because if you look at the coloring, black, red, white, well, you know that this has to be black, red, white as well across. So even though it doesn't have the notch to fit into the receiver, you will know that that's the correct direction. So everything is set. My battery is plugged in, and here is our servo. Now, using the on-off switch for the Hobbywing 1060, you should see a little shimmy happen with the servo. And once it's finished its shimmy, it's in neutral and it's ready to have all the servo saver pieces installed. So I'm just going to do that. Make sure you can see that. Now, I felt something inside the servo, but I didn't see anything. I'll do this once again. Yeah, no change. So I don't know if it was kind of hard to see. I don't think it actually moved much, but I could feel something inside move, but didn't do much. So I think it was actually already in neutral before we did this test. So that's great. It just means that the servo is now ready for everything else. So I'm going to disconnect all of this and we'll get to installing the servo saver. So first off, let's figure out this. And as I mentioned earlier, I already figured out which screw. So if you take a look at the servo, it came with a servo saver on top of it, and this little screw. Now you'll notice it is a tapping screw. So when you go over here, it's saying match the part. Well, this screw that came with the kit matches this BC4 the closest, because this is a much thicker screw. This is a thin one. It's the closest, so we're going to be using the BC4 tapping screw that came with the kit, and that's the more of a match. And of course, you can see that we're going to be using P5 because P5 is fitting a Futaba or Tamiya. These ones are Ancom or Sanwa, and you can see on the back side of this, it actually says Futaba. So that's the one that we're going to be using to screw into the servo. Now, to get started on this, you'll notice that the cable is coming out of that side, and so that's the positioning. Sometimes they show it this way, and you can sometimes get it confused if you're not looking at the diagram properly, but you definitely want it this way, and you can also see that the motor is on the left-hand side. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to get this piece on there. as well as this piece, which is our P4. So I'm going to pop that over top of there. And you can see that they want this as close to this positioning as possible. Now, in the normal way, they always seem to say, make sure that it's straight up and down. They're telling you here that they want it to be 15 degrees off. So normally I would be putting a servo saver on as close to level, like you see where the hole is, as close to that as possible, so that it is, you know, it's kind of the 90-degree angle. But they want the 15 degrees, so I'm going to turn it that way because that's not going to be quite right. So if I turn it one notch over, so you can see I can move it there, but because of the gears and the gearing on the back of that, we need to move it over one slightly. So I'm just going to move it over one. Now that means that if you put this part on top of there, which I'll actually do this way, and that way you can see what I'm doing. Pop that onto there. That's this piece here. The A3. We then also have our ball connector that needs to be put on. So I'll do that now with the handy dandy box wrench. So we're going to put that in. And again, this is nice because you can see that I haven't quite got that right, so I can take that out, make sure that I kind of level it up a bit, turn it in. Now it's correct. So let's screw that in. See, it's already shifted. As close as possible. No, it doesn't want to do that this time. Let's try this. There we go. So we'll screw this in all the way. There we go. There's our ball connector in place. And then we'll look at it this way, because then you can see it better too. That if I did this up and down as I was originally showing you, see how it's that 90 degrees basically? If I move that one over, that's close to what they're actually showing on the diagram. So that's where we're going to put it. So you now have this P1 piece that's got to sit inside of there. And then we have the BC4 screw that's now got to screw down inside of there. Now I'm going to hold this with my thumb so that it doesn't move. So as I'm turning one way, I'm using my thumb to push back on it to make sure that it doesn't come out. And be careful, because these are small screws, so even though they're tapping screws, you don't want to end up over tightening. So that felt pretty good. I am going to just do one last test. I'll put my thumb there again to push back on it so that it's not turning on itself. And there we go. So there is our steering servo, the 15-degree angle as they're showing. And if for some reason we need to adjust, we can use the trim to do the fine tuning of the positioning of this. But as a whole, that's it. There is our servo ready to go. It's in neutral. We've put our servo saver on. So step 23 is complete. So we're going to move on to step 24 now and attach the steering servo.